This is JMK. Actually, pardon me, I'm still used to doing my YouTube videos, pardon me. This is James Krishnarik here with another live podcast of Real Still Sports on Spreaker Web Radio. I will be breaking down the BNP Paribas Open in Indian Wells, California. That'll be taking place March 6th to the 16th in Indian Wells. It is a Masters 1000 event. All the big names are there for this tournament, and I'm going to preview the draw, who I think will win it, and how I think it will end up playing out. Now let's start with the favorites in this tournament. You've got Nadal, won the tournament last year, defending champion. You've got Wawrinka, the Australian Open champion. Federer's won this event numerous times in his career. You've got Gasquet's had some good runs here. Berdych has. You've got Djokovic, who's won the title on numerous occasions. You literally got all the big names in this tournament. Ferrer's the only one out, and he's got a leg injury, so I wish him a speedy recovery. But more or less, it's going to be interesting to see who can actually win this tournament, because it's wide open this year. I don't think there's one favorite. Nadal's back injury is kind of an equalizer. But let's start with Nadal's part of the draw to begin with. Spreaker's new thing, which really is pissing me off, is that whenever one show ends, if I don't have an actual professional account, if I'm not paying money, which I don't, to have my Spreaker account, I got to wait 15 minutes between shows. So in the 15 minutes, I decide to open the draw, break down, look at injuries, look at who's playing who, and decide who I think is going to win the tournament. So I've got a pretty fair opinion of what's going to happen. I've got a pretty good idea of what's going on. The big injuries for this tournament is the three guys that are playing that are hurt. Del Potro's left wrist was bothering him earlier a past few weeks. Nadal's back obviously bothered him in Australia, and though he won the tournament, I believe it was in Buenos Aires, did not look 100%. And you've got John Isner, who has been out for most of this year with an ankle injury, but he's back for this tournament. Now, Nadal's section looks pretty straightforward. A match that could potentially get tricky, second rounder against Radek Stepanek, provided he beats Istomin. Nadal's got a bye, so he'd probably play Stepanek in the second round, but I think he'd get through that. Of the four Masters events in the USA on outdoor hard court, I'd have to say this is probably the slowest court. Montreal's slower, Montreal's slow but not this slow, Miami's slow, not this slow, and Cincinnati's pretty quick. Dagapolov in the third round could be potential, but I think Nadal can beat him. He just beat him in a final on clay. But I think the fact that on hard court, Dagapolov is a much better player, so I think that'd be a little more confusing for Nadal. Besides, Dagapolov, or the dog as they call him, has one of the most interesting and wacky games on the Pro Tour. Whoever would play Nadal in the round of 16, I'm looking at that more or less being Gael Monfils. Because Monfils not had that impressive a year, but he's the best player in his section. Because Sergei Stakhovsky, who beat Federer at Wimbledon's okay. Ryan Harrison's a joke. No offense to him, but seriously, American tennis players other than John Isner are just a joke. And John Isner and the Bryans, I should say. They're really good. The best doubles team ever. But that's back to tennis. Back to singles. And Fabio Fognini. Monfils should probably get to that section and play him in the fourth round. The next section, I like Milos Raonic. I know Jerzy Janowicz is a tough opponent, but I think he'd beat Janowicz because Janowicz is very inconsistent, very hot and cold. And other than he's kind of living off the fat of his Wimbledon semis and has not done a whole lot since reaching the semis at Wimbledon last year. Meanwhile, in the other section, you've got fifth seed Andy Murray, who's won this tournament before, and Pablo Andujar, the number 32 seed Spaniard. Murray should get to that section fairly comfortably because there's no one in that section. Even if Murray, isn't playing well, definitely should still be able to get through this. Because I know Murray just lost to Grigor Dimitrov, the 15th seed from Bulgaria, but it doesn't matter. Murray should get through this, which means the two fourth-round matchups in the first quarter should be set as such. You'll have Nadal versus Monfils and Raonic versus Murray, and I like those matchups because the best players right now in their brackets, not in terms of seeding, but more or less in terms of how good they are. And I would pick Nadal and Murray to get through those matches because they've won this tournament before. They're both Grand Slam champions in the same quarter. It's just one of those things where whoever's playing better. And I think that'll be Murray and Nadal. I would pick Nadal to reach the semifinal in the top bracket of the top quarter of the draw. I think he would beat out Murray. And I think I think he would be able to take him out because Murray's not playing that great this year, and Nadal, even though he didn't play well in Buenos Aires, he won the title. I keep thinking it's Buenos Aires. I could be wrong, but he's fine. He'll be back to 100% shortly. But that being said, I think that right now there's other guys in the draw who are playing better than Murray is this year. Now for the next quarter of the draw, the highest seed in this draw is Wawrinka, and the number 2 seed in this draw is Federer. Wawrinka being number 3, the Australian Open champion, and Federer being number 7 seed out of, obviously, with 17 majors, who I list as the greatest of all time. This is going to be a really interesting bracket because you got a bunch of guys with different talents in this draw. You've got Tursunov and Anderson, who are big hitters. You've got Seppi, who's a defensive player. You've got Haas and Nishikori, who are more or less all quarters / baseliners. This draw is really interesting. I would have to say in that first quarter of the draw, I like Wawrinka off his Australian Open victory, carries some momentum. Sam Querrey potentially, provided he beats the qualifier in the first round, then Seppi in the second, which I don't really think he's going to get through that. I like Wawrinka to get to the round of 16 to take on probably Anderson. Mikhail Yuzny is a really good player out of Russia, one-handed backhand. He's been the top of the game for a long time, but Anderson's playing better this year. He's got a big serve, and I think the conditions in Southern California, I think, will suit him better than Yuzny. And he's had some good results at this tournament. So I would have to put Wawrinka and Anderson in the round of 16. And in the other round of 16, I'm going with Nishikori and Federer. Haas has been subpar this year, and Tursunov, you don't really know what you're going to get out of him. And there's really no wild cards in this event, in this section, like not legit wild cards. I'm talking like not like an actual literal wild card, but I'm talking guys that could make a run or knock off a few big names. There's no real guys with that kind of start, kind of crash the party potential. I would have to look at Federer and Nishikori because they're the best and most consistent in their bracket. And that would pretty much leave Wawrinka versus Anderson in the first round of 16 match in this bracket, and then Haas versus Federer, not Haas, sorry, Nishikori versus Federer in the other one. And if that's the case, I like both the higher ranked guys. I like Wawrinka and I like Federer because they've been off to good starts this year. Federer reaching a semi in Australia and winning a title in Dubai, and then you've got Nishikori, who had a decent run in Australia, and he's been one of the more consistent players over the last few months. Then what you have on top of that is you've got a potential for a really interesting quarterfinal between Wawrinka and Federer. And you look at Wawrinka stepping up, playing some big time tennis the last few months, winning the Australian Open in very impressive fashion, 2 convincing wins over Berdych and Nadal, and a big 5-set win over Djokovic, the first time he'd ever beaten him. Versus Federer, who's had a relatively impressive year, a final, a semi in Australia, and of course a title in Dubai, beating Djokovic and Berdych along the way, dropping the first set both times. I'd like to give the edge to Federer, and the reason why is because he's had better success at this tournament. I believe he's won this title. I believe it's four times he's won this. 4, 5, 6, and 12. Yeah, played well at this event historically. It's one of his favorite tournaments to play. He usually does well here. And I know Wawrinka's off the high of winning this Australian Open, but I think Federer will take this title. I think Federer will take, I'm not saying he'll take this title, I'm thinking Federer will take this match, and he'll be lined up to play Rafael Nadal in the semifinal. So if that's the case, in the top half, you get the dream matchup. You get Nadal and you get Federer. And if that's the case, I'm going with Federer. I don't think we'll get a repeat of what happened in Australia. I really don't think we'll get a repeat of what happened down there because I think Federer is playing with more confidence now. He's had more time to adjust to his new racket. It'll be best 2 out of 3 instead of 3 out of 5 because 3 out of 5 against Nadal is an instant disadvantage versus 2 out of 3. And if you look at the record Nadal and Federer have against each other in best 2 out of 3 matches, it's very, very favoring to Federer. Much more favoring than in Grand Slams. So I would have to give a slight edge to Federer. I think he's played better this year, and I think he's played more consistently this year. I will have to give the edge to Roger, and I think that he will get to the final. So in the next part of the draw, the next fourth round encounter will be, in my opinion, between Richard Gasquet and Philipp Kohlschreiber. Gasquet, the 8th-seeded Frenchman, and Kohlschreiber, the 22nd ranked German. A couple dangerous players in this section in the draw. Gasquet's countryman Nick Mahut, Davydenko, the Russian, who's been a top 10, top 5, top 3 player for numerous years, and Fernando Verdasco can every once in a while sneak in an upset. And then, of course, you got John Isner, the American. But Isner's off an ankle injury, and I think his body's starting to break down after all these years in the tour. I look for Kohlschreiber and Gasquet because Kohlschreiber has a winning record over Isner, and because Gasquet is the most talented player in his part of the draw, and unless Verdasco comes out and plays him, straight up beating the ball in his backhand, I don't see any way that would change anything. So I think Gasquet would get through that, and I think he'll be lined up to play Kohlschreiber. I mean, if that's the case, that'd be a really interesting match itself because you've got Richard Gasquet, who's the talented Frenchman, been in the top 10 for quite a few years now. He's finally starting to get his head together. And you've got Kohlschreiber, a guy who's been very talented, kind of hovered in the top 20 for most of his career, just sitting outside the top 20 now. 2-2 is their head-to-head record, and they've played some really interesting matches. They just played in Rotterdam a couple weeks ago, and Kohlschreiber took them out 7-5, 7-5. And they've played a couple of times on hard courts, and Kohlschreiber beat them both times and dropped one set in those two meetings. I'm going to have to go with Gasquet in this one because the bigger stage, I think he'll handle the conditions outdoors better. I think he's a better outdoor player than Kohlschreiber, and I think that it really could come down to who has the better one-handed backhand because they both got beautiful backhands. But Gasquet has had a couple of really good runs in this tournament before, and he's had better success in Masters events than Kohlschreiber. Been in a final, actually been in several finals, and he's beaten some big names in these tournaments. So I got to go with Gasquet over Kohlschreiber into the quarterfinal. So that's where I think I stand on that part of the bracket. Now we've got the next part of the bracket. That would feature more or less Thomas Berdych. And I have him slated to play Grigor Dimitrov in the fourth round. Now that part of the draw could be fairly tricky because Ernest Gulbis could throw a monkey wrench in there because he's a good player. He's a really good player out of Latvia, finally starting to live up to his potential that he's had for years but never capitalized on. Jarkko Niemann in the finicky Finn, he always sneaks in a run whenever you least expect it. And Robin Haase, the guy who beat Nadal at the Wimbledon a few years ago. But this is Dimitrov and Berdych because Dimitrov gave Nadal a hell of a tough match in Australia, and just won a title this last week. So he's finally starting to get his game. Berdych, of course, reaching the final in Dubai, playing some good ball. He should probably keep his preference of who he likes to play in finals quiet because I think that kind of gave Federer some incentive to beat him. But more or less, that's just a kidding aside. I think Berdych would take him out because I think he just has too much power off the ground. The consistent power you get from Berdych would just overwhelm him because, yeah, Dimitrov's got a nice game. His game looks a lot like Federer's, but he's got a long way to go before he really can stay that he's a true contender in big tournaments. Berdych has been there. He's won a Masters event before. He's been in the final a few other times. He's been in a Grand Slam final at Wimbledon and a semi at the Open. I think he's meets the semi at least all four of the majors. So he's had a very, very consistent career. But for my money, I would have to say that Berdych would get through this section. And I think he would end up playing Gasquet in the quarter. And if that's the case, I like the thought of Berdych getting through. If you look at the head-to-head record between the two of them,